it creates employment. Of course, in microcosm, you can have particular issues, but it's overwhelmingly a good, not an evil, in economic terms. I should say also that in the last year we've had the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. I hate all of these words, which to many people are meaningless, but they can be given meaning by political action. People make promises and they fail to deliver. The commitments of that agenda include reducing the costs of recruitment. There are plenty of recruiters in this country. There's a huge industry around recruitment. This country has to be a demonstration that recruitment is conducted in terms which is absolutely fair, honourable, and in the interests of the migrant as well as the recruiters. That is also the obligation of the countries of destination. In Bangladesh, so many of those are in the Gulf area. These have an obligation to impose and apply rigorously laws in relation to recruitment, laws in regard to smuggling of people, and above all, the horror of trafficking, particularly trafficking of women and children, which is so odious to us all. That requires a great deal of international effort. Skills recognition, the portability of pension rights when people retire, the portability of such benefits as have been received, particularly in the developed world, is an important element of this. Because not merely remittances, which the evidence in Bangladesh proves so obviously as a vital element in the economic planning of this country, remittances and the costs of remittances, I think they're down to an average of 8%. I think that they were 15% when we started. I can't claim the credit for that, but they should be about 2 to 3% at the most. And the amount that would be involved in the savings available often to the poorest people in our societies by a reduction of those costs to the levels I've now described is enormous. A multiple of the total of foreign direct investment, a multiple of the total of foreign aid. All over the developed world, I see it in Europe, we have debates every year about how much are we giving in development aid. And politicians are saying, we can't afford it, we're in a recession. We have to keep the money at home and we have to help our own. It's tiny as a proportion of national budgets. Absolutely tiny. And how many of those countries, in how many of those countries, has there been a proper dialogue between, for an example, development departments and ministries of finance? How many ministers of development who are doing, I'm not saying doing a bad job, they're trying to provide development aid across borders, how many of them have ever telephoned their colleague in the Ministry of Finance and asked the Minister of Finance, what are you doing to apply to the financial sector the obligation of lowering the cost of transferring remittances, the hard-won monies earned by the poorest in our society to send home to the poorest in their societies? I bet you if you did an absolute honest display here of the development ministers of every country in the developed world and asked them to honestly raise their hands and say that they've spoken to the Minister for Finance, lifted a telephone, I wonder how many would do it. It's time that the world woke up to the fact that the joinder of these issues in national policy is crucial. And it's at this time, at a time when we have the focus, when we have a series of conferences at international level that are going to take place, culminating at the end of the year in a special UN summit, which I'm involved in, and flying from here today to New York to try to influence, which will try to set out some form of roadmap, some form of plan as to where we're going with this subject at a multilateral level. How the failures of the past cannot be replicated into the future. And during that crucial time, Bangladesh is in the chair of the GFMD, which is one, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's one of the achievements, perhaps the only main multilateral achievement of the last 10 years. And that gives, in combination with the role as leading the least developed countries of the world, it gives a leverage position and a point of influence to Bangladesh, which is very important. And this isn't the usual sort of speech that people give and try to present positives where they don't exist and exaggerate realities. I'm expressing what I actually think. And therefore, I say, as I said, and she totally agreed to the Prime Minister yesterday, this is a moment where Bangladesh, stepping up to the plate as it has done, is demonstrating a capacity to recognize a responsibility. And I'm delighted, therefore, to be here. Although the opportunity delivered by all of these events is considerable, so also is the challenge. A challenge accentuated by the abominations that we have seen in Paris, in Cologne, in Beirut, in Istanbul, and elsewhere. Terrible violence, which has created and provided support for xenophobia, for racism, that is evident in the political complexion of many developed countries, where parties at the extreme right are growing in influence and power. It has also provided an opportunity for some to blame those who are fleeing from ISIS for the condition which has driven them to flee, to deny them the status of refugee, which entitles them to asylum. This foul distortion of logic is unacceptable. The work that UNHCR is doing in this area is vitally important for the world. So is IOM in the broader constituency of migrants, including refugees. Earlier this year, the Secretary General, speaking at the General Assembly, towards the end of last year, in fact, he said, we must respond not by closing doors, but by opening our hearts. The Pope has said the same thing on a number of occasions, most recently in the last 2 weeks. A point that the Pope made, which I think is very important, and I'm delighted that he said, is that our absolute obligation under the Convention of 1951 to refugees, which is quite distinct and vital, should not nonetheless have the effect of creating a failure to recognize that some people who are not defined as refugees, because they are not escaping persecution, can also be fleeing from mortal danger caused by environmental disaster, for example, and that they also have, not under the convention, but they also must have rights in humanity terms. And that is in a General Assembly, another occasion for prime ministers to stand up, to read out speeches that have been written for them by their civil servants, make expressions of all sorts of good and expressions of platitude. That's not good enough anymore. And I think we have to try to hold this to account. In a couple of weeks' time, there'll be a funding conference in London geared towards the need of Syrians inside Syria and towards their integration in neighboring countries. At the end of March, the UNHCR, therefore, is hosting a meeting on pathways for Syrians, seeking to expand the toolbox for resettlement. Countries that look at this problem and say, no, the problem of Syrian refugees, and this is a classic example, is a problem for the Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. And when I ask the question, why is it a case of a responsibility for Turkey, for an example, which has over 2 million refugees, or Lebanon, which has over a quarter of its population refugees? Why is it their problem? Is it their problem because of proximity? They happen to be closest to the problem, therefore they carry the can. And we refuse, collectively, the world, to resettle people or to find a means to do it. Oh, people say, oh, we can't. There is no answer. We can't do it. And if we try and relocate people within the European Union, they don't want to go there, so they get out and they go somewhere else, etc., etc. We have to find a way. It's happened before with Vietnam. It happened before with Hungary. Instead of throwing up our arms and saying, no, we can't do it, which is exactly what they're not doing. They are not resettling. They are not relocating. The difference between those two words, incidentally, resettlement in European terms means taking people from outside the European Union in camps and locating them, putting them in the European Union. Relocating means taking people from the two countries who happen to be receiving the migrants in Europe, in the main, namely Greece, where they are overwhelmingly arriving, or Italy. Greece gradually becomes a country behind barbed wire fences erected by other countries, including in the Macedonian border, the whole way up Europe. Every day we hear of more fences, more borders. What is Greece left to do? Create a vast camp? I've said on television, what are the alternatives? Leave them on the beaches. Let them drown in the Mediterranean. Send them back to the horrors from which they have escaped. Or welcome them in a part of the world which has a huge percentage, over 20% of global GDP, and has a population of 508 million, the European Union, which could well handle all of these problems. Here, as you know, and I'm not going to go into it, I've already spent far too long speaking, which is the prerogative, I should tell you, of anybody who's Irish. If you invite them to speak, they'll speak for too long. But this is also your problem in the context of events in Myanmar. Your problem in terms of the integration of different religions and perspectives. Also your opportunity. And I know action plans are in existence and so on. But let me say, if cooperation and constructive engagement with this issue around the world doesn't happen, rogue actors will flourish. Smugglers, organized crime will be the prime winners, vulnerable migrants will be the losers. Only by cooperating within society, driven by and connected by, hopefully, the active engagement of the NGO community, can we find responses. I'm confident that with Bangladesh as its current chair, and the commitment that I've already seen to be so evident, following on a commitment of the past, former chairman, Turkey, Sweden, represented here today, driven by the prospect of others taking up the challenge following this country, namely Morocco and Germany, both of whom have agreed to host the next GFMDs, we can make progress. But we have to make progress on the institutional issues too. We have to have a more coherent UN system that works effectively, rather than one which promotes competition within countries, departments, government departments, or areas of activity within the UN itself. We can't have feudal fiefdoms battling for their powers and rights. We need, above all, to recognize that we're protecting those fleeing destitution, generalized violence, climate change-induced disasters. We need to expand legal pathways for those in need of protection. We can't allow the more than 5,400 who drowned last year in the Mediterranean, trying to cross the Mediterranean. As Bangladesh engages with these international processes, your responsibility as chair of the GFMD to ensure that the migration issue doesn't fall off the radar is one which I know you will rise to. This role, therefore, and this opportunity which I've been given to speak at excessive length here today is one which I welcome. And I welcome, as I did in supporting the nomination of Bangladesh as this chair, the chair of the GFMD, a state-led process, is something which I am happy to be part of and happy to be with you here in this great country of Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
A different which is much more sensitive and little more sympathetic towards people who are on the move. Thank you, sir. Now we have another distinguished person, Ambassador Eva Ackerman from Sweden. Eva has been a long-standing friend of migration and migrants. She has been the chair of GFMD, the 7th one before Turkey, and a very strong proponent of issues which just Peter Sutherland spelled out before us. He has also been a very good friend of Bangladesh. So we thought that we should have him along with Sir Peter Sutherland to share her thoughts onto the whole issue of migration in the context of development. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Let me first of all thank you very much for welcoming me in Bangladesh and Dhaka, and to congratulate you for taking the chair and taking upon you this very important task of chairing the Global Forum on Migration and Development. I'm convinced that you will do an excellent job as the chair, and that you will share and steer this global project forward in a flawless manner. I know personally that being the chair of the Global Forum means a lot of hard work and dedication, but also fantastic experiences, a lot of new knowledge and new friends from all over the world, and you do have a great time ahead of you. Sweden has been a main advocate of the Global Forum on Migration and Development since its establishment in 2006, and we chaired the forum in 2013 and 2014 as the 7th chairmanship. We will, of course, continue to be strongly engaged in this process. It's of great importance that we can hold open and constructive exchanges of views on all issues on the global migration agenda. And the GFMD dialogue has resulted in greater trust and understanding between countries of destination, transit, and origin. And this is something that we should really continue to build on, as you rightly pointed out, Mr. Chairman. We believe that the informal and state-led structure of the Global Forum has been very important aspects behind the success. Throughout the years, Sweden and Bangladesh have had a close and trustful partnership within the Global Forum process. While being different types of countries in many ways, our countries have yet become and remain true partners and allies in the field of global migration and development. Together we have achieved a lot in this field. I'm especially proud that Sweden and Bangladesh were two of the main advocates of including migration in the 2030 UN Development Agenda and in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Together we have created a framework that can assist us in fostering the positive effects of migration and development. The world now needs to deliver on the commitments that we have made. We need to lower the costs of remittances, improve migrants' working conditions, and facilitate orderly, safe and regular and responsible migration. Then, the development impact of migration can be so much stronger, a means to reach the global goals. These issues will both be highly relevant throughout your chairmanship of the Global Forum. And the Swedish government takes the responsibilities of the new Sustainable Development Goals in the 2013 agenda very seriously. And I would just like to give a few examples of the areas where we are engaged. First of all, on labor migration, which offers opportunities for economic development and attainment of knowledge and